Well, it's finished. Today is August 2nd, and I'm way ahead of schedule. But the cigar box ukulele is complete. Let's take a look at how we got here. We began the build with a nice piece of koa that I had saved for quite a few years. I decided to hand make the cigar box instead of using a purchased one. And here I am resawing and setting the wood for the sides and the front and the back of the actual box. Sanding the top and the back to thickness, which did turn out to be a little too thick. I then hand cut the box joints to hold the box together, laying them out with a caliper, marking them with a marking gauge so that I could cut them out with the saw and chisels. It's important that they are marked properly so that everything fits together. I used a dovetail saw to cut down to my marked lines, and then a chisel to remove the waste. And this had to be done on all four corners, both front, back, sides. I used the first cut side to mark the next side so that everything lined up. And again, the same thing. Saw and chisels do the dovetails until we had a nice fit. And this was ready for glue up. Box was glued up, came out nice and square. If the box joints are cut right, the box kind of squares itself. The top and back came out really nice. And then it was time to make the neck. And the neck needs to be notched to fit the box cover and then hogged out to leave support for the bridge, but then leave room for the top to vibrate. After that was cutting the headstock and the rough cutting of the neck, adding the wings for the headstock, although I really didn't need that much. Then planing down the wood for the headstock to make it even. Got to use some of my hand tools, which was fun. Rough shaped what I wanted the headstock to be so that I could at least get it cut partially. And then I could glue on the overlay, which is another piece of koa that I've had hanging out for a while. It was time to make the bridge, and I modeled the bridge on a ukulele I made several years ago, and that is done on the table. So I'm basically just cutting slots with a much oversized blank to keep it safe, then cutting it down and cutting it to size where it had to be cut down thinner and to match the thickness of my fingerboard so that I could get a good action on the strings. There's a slot for the tail, and then I drilled the holes for the strings to pass through. Now it's time. Fingerboard, I had a piece of Bolivian rosewood, cut it to length, cut it to width, and then I had to resaw it to get it to the thickness that I wanted it to be. Again, we're trying to match the bridge and the fingerboard so that once the saddle and the nut are in place, we get good string action. Here I'm marking out the frets and then cutting them using a miter box and a fret width saw. And we have the fingerboard all sawed. The next step was to radius the fingerboard. We went for a 16-inch radius, which is not usual for ukulele, but I wanted it a little radiused. Installed the side dots, installed the face dots. Then we test fit it to the neck and made sure it fit onto the neck. Put in some markers. We had to drill the holes for the headstock for the tuners, and then we had to notch the box because the neck drops into the box. It doesn't fit a dovetail, or it's not bolted in any way. It just kind of fits into a notch cut in the box. Once that was done, we fitted the top, lined everything up, and prepared it for raising the neck. We needed to cut the neck round in the back so it's comfortable to play. Using rasps and spoke shaves and files, we got that done. Then we fretted the neck, and hammering in the frets, leveling the frets, crowning the frets, all to make a good playing experience on the instrument. Then it was time to glue it up with a little bit of tape to protect the surfaces where glue might seep out, and it was tough to sand. And then we had to install the electronics, and we had to drill recesses for the controls because the sides were too thick for the controls to pass through, and the top was too small for them to pop out the top. Glued on our handmade bridge, and then applied finish. True Oil gunstock finish works really well. 4 or 5 coats, and it looked pretty good. Now we had to install the electronics, volume control, jack, and the 2 sensors that go behind the bridge. The back was screwed on with brass screws so that it could be removed if we ever need to work on it. And we installed the tuners. From there, we're pretty much setting up the saddle and the nut, radiusing them and slotting them, and then it was all assembled and ready to go. It was an interesting journey to get to this point. I like the way it looks. I think it's very cool. The finish came out pretty good. The action's really nice. The problem, if you can hear that, it's very low. It's not a very loud instrument. 2 factors that I think come into play for this is the fact that it's such a small surface area for the top to vibrate. I think the top may be a little bit thick. I tried to compensate for that by making the body a little deeper. But it is very soft. But amplified, it sounds pretty good, and we can really crank it up. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with the result, and I hope you enjoyed. Those of you that watched the series on building it, I hope you enjoyed and maybe learned something. And hopefully we'll see you next year.